Over the past month or so, we've been looking at some interesting scriptures from Romans and Matthew. They describe to us God's desired presence in our lives and what God has done on our behalf, and how loved we are as children of God. We've touched on some topics about confidence, assurance, and we've listed some pretty wonderful reasons to walk with God and to allow God to walk with us. This morning I thought it might be about time to see some of those ideas in action. To not just think of them as concepts and words on a page and great things to think about, but how they really play out in real life. So this morning I want us to look at someone who is a lot closer to each and every one of us than most of us would like to admit. Today I'm going to talk about Jacob and his life. And if you follow the lectionary throughout the years, passages, we always have an Old Testament passage, a Psalm, a New Testament reading, and a Gospel. And while I've been dwelling on Romans and Matthew, we've been following Genesis through the life of Jacob. And the passage I want to talk about today actually comes towards the end of our story of Jacob. Next week, the Old Testament lectionary picks up with his son Joseph. And that's a whole new ball game right there. But Jacob's story, for me, makes today's reality TV pale in comparison. It's sort of like Survivor, The Amazing Race, and Big Brother all rolled into one. So I'd like to recap Jacob's story to remember where we are so we can catch up with what he's done thus far in his life to get to where we are at this morning's passage. First, he's Abraham's grandson. He's Isaac and Rebekah's son, born a twin. The second twin, he was grabbing a hold of Esau's heel as he was born. Thus his name, the heel grabber. We know that they grew up and Esau was Isaac's favorite. Jacob was Rebekah's favorite. Jacob stayed close to home, learned how to cook and clean. Maybe be called a mama's boy. While Esau went out hunting and fishing and being that ruddy outdoorsman that our fathers all wish we had been. But one day Esau comes in from his hunt. He is famished. He is absolutely starving. And here's Jacob sitting around the fire stirring a pot of soup there. And Esau would have given anything right then and there to get some of that soup because he's hungry. Well, wily old Jacob says, well, I'll let you have a bowl of soup if you'll give me your birthright. Well, Esau didn't think much about it, so he'd rather have the bowl of soup right then than his birthright. So he gives Jacob his birthright. And then Rebekah helps Jacob dress up like Esau and sneak into the blind Isaac's tent. And not only does he get his birthright, he gets his blessing. Well, Esau finds out about that, and what does he do? He threatens to kill him. So Rebekah helps him get on the run, and sure enough, Jacob lives his life on the run. Rebekah says, I've got an uncle that lives about 70 miles north of here on a big old ranch. So why don't you go up there till we get things cooled off down here with your brother and your father. And by the way, Uncle Laban's got some beautiful daughters. Maybe you'll find a wife while you're up there. Learn a trade. Get away from me. Let's cut the apron strings. So with the clothes on his back, Jacob goes to Uncle Laban's house. Well, while he was there, he comes upon the most beautiful woman he's ever seen, the love of his life, Rachel. And he falls madly in love with Rachel. And he says, Uncle Laban, I will work 7 years for you if you will give me your daughter's hand, Rachel, in marriage. Uncle Laban knows a good thing when he sees it, and he says, why, of course, my nephew. Just give me 7 years of hard labor with my flocks, and I'll be glad to give you my daughter's hand in marriage. Well, he does work 7 years. And the wedding feast comes, and everything's great, and Jacob has 1 glass of wine too many, and the 7 veils are covering his bride's face, and he gets to the marriage bed, and a little too much wine, a little too much veils, and he wakes up in the morning, and who should be there but the weak-eyed Leah, the older sister. Oh, wily Jacob had been out-deceived by his uncle Laban and given the older daughter Leah's hand in marriage. Well, that just ticked Jacob off. So he goes to Laban and he says, you promised me Rachel's hand in marriage. And he says, well, in my custom, we never give the younger daughter before the older daughter is married. So we can work this out. If you'll work 7 more years for me, you may have my daughter Rachel too. So sure enough, for the love of his life, Jacob works 7 more long, hard years, marries Rachel, and during this time he thinks, well, I'm going to get back at the old man. I'm going to work in these flocks to build up some sweat equity. So he manipulates Uncle Laban's flocks and builds his own. Uncle Laban's keeping all the solid animals. Jacob's getting all the spotted animals. So he does what he does best. He deceives and puts the animals together that are going to increase his flocks and decrease his uncle's. And about that time, when he's amassed all this wealth and a couple of wives and servants and all these things, the Lord appears to him and says, your father has passed. It's time for you to go home. Time to go back where you came from, boy. So that's also about the time that Uncle Laban realized he had been hoodooed. So about 70 miles south, we've got Esau who said, if I ever lay eyes on you again, I'm going to kill you. Behind him, he's got an Uncle Laban and his sons that are saying, I'm so mad at you, I'm going to kill you. Jacob was between a rock and a hard place. So, listening to God, he takes off with his family and his wealth and his flocks and heads back to the promised land. If you've read the story or know the story of Jacob, you know that all of his life he's relied on his own cunning and all of his deceit to get what he wanted, and he burned a whole lot of bridges getting there. But now that God has told him to return to the promised land, he does, and he gets to the point on the Jabbok River where it's time to camp out for the night and to send a messenger in to tell Esau that he's home. So Jacob sends in his messengers. They come back and they say, Esau's coming to greet you, along with 400 of his men.